From the 17th chapter of John's Gospel, the words of Jesus recorded by John. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, that they also may be in us, so the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one, as we are one. I and them, and you and me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them even as you have loved me. John writes an overheard prayer of Jesus. He's talking to God the Father, and his disciples have a chance to hear what he is saying. Jesus talks about being in the Father and desires that we are also in him, that we are one with each other. Being in Jesus is John's theological language to describe a state of communion, with one another, essential to our faith. It's so connected to Christ that it kind of shapes everything about who we are and how we live our lives. We are often familiar with something negative that comes and sometimes kind of out of the blue and shapes what we do, like running out of money or some kind of threat or a crisis or illness. And that shapes who we are for a while. This is, on the other side, something positive that's intended to shape us our whole lives. I don't know what this one with Jesus and God, if that refers to individuals or one with one another or our particular church or one with all Christians or all of the above. If you have noticed, Christians, especially of different theological persuasions, do not always play well together. Disciples always try to be ecumenical, but some are pretty harsh in their beliefs and don't let us in their tent. Jesus has perhaps prioritized our unity because he saved it for last. John 17, it's the final scene in Jesus' last meal with his disciples. First he prays for the immediate community, and then he prays for those who will come to believe, the future Christians. Maybe he saves this prayer for last because perhaps he knows the unity of his followers will be something we will struggle with a lot. He prays for us because he knows we need it. Most people don't like change, especially in religion. I don't know if you noticed, the elders kind of slipped in a little different way of doing their prayers at the table today. And nothing fell down. Statistics I've heard are about 6% of a congregation will change in a year. Well, people get where they can't come for one reason or another, or they move, or they drop out, new people come. 6%, that's kind of a change that's inevitable, and you think about 6% one year and the next year, and it doesn't take too many years and you're up to 50% change. We are in a particular process of change right now, and I'm sure that we will all be in agreement on all the steps of the process. This week we received our official poster. What progress are we making in the search for a new pastor? And Carol Brewer, you will get this for your own to keep and post. I don't know where we'll put this, but somewhere where people can see it. But we have met with the regional minister. One, we've appointed the search committee. Search committee has met with the regional minister. That's number 3. And 4, that's the process we're on now. Completing a congregational profile, a position description, and information packet for pastoral candidates. And there's another 6 steps. Well, now we're official because we have a poster, and we can move on with the process. We as disciples of Christ are part of a small but relevant denomination. We are 3,600 churches in covenant, which means that we agree to get along and work together and try to follow the rules that we've set for ourselves. There is a document that's about 30 years old that's called Ethical Guidelines for Congregations. And the board has begun to look at that. It's been around a while, but probably you may have approved that at some time. Nobody seems to remember. But it's like, how do we treat one another? And how do our ministries operate? And how do we work with our committees and other denominations and other things? It's just a lot of common sense stuff, but it's something that we need to see and talk about from time to time. Also, there is, within the Christian church, a ministerial code of ethics. If you want to see one of those, it's on the door of my office. It has to do with my personal contact, my relationship to the church and to other ministers. As an interim, I am not a candidate for this permanent job, or should I try to influence the search committee? One of my responsibilities is to help the congregation have healthy goodbyes. We need to thank David Bryce for his years of work here, but we do not need to call on him for pastoral duties any longer. Well, you know, there's a rule and then exceptions pop up, but, you know, special circumstances happen from time to time, and sometimes that puts everybody in a bind. I have been asked a number of times to do weddings or funerals for former congregants, people that I was very good friends with, but I must decline that. I was explaining that to a church that I left years ago, that I was no longer their pastor, and I overheard a man saying, well, he doesn't care about us anymore. Well, I'm sorry that was the message that he got, but that's not what, actually I care about you very much, not to intrude on the work of your next pastor. The interim time is a unique time. If you read the newsletter, I've written several articles about this. I thought I might spend a little time in worship to talk about it too. My role is to lead worship, to support and supplement the elders in their pastoral tasks, and to help you get ready for the next minister. This church is pretty well organized, so I have a few things to do, though, to help you update practices and procedures with committees and publicity. Some things are relatively easy. We're trying to update the directory. And if you haven't and had a chance to look at the directory, we're getting those passed around in our classes and here at worship. Just make sure that we have the right information. I've called many of you on your preferred number and discovered, well, it's a landline that you don't have anymore because you've got a cell phone that you're using. We're also working on, with our committees, to establish a program of planned giving. Some people like to think about giving a part of their estate or a part of their accumulated resources to their church. And we're trying to make that easier for you to do, that you would know that it would go to the fund that you prefer or to a permanent fund that will always be here, and the earnings from that fund would be given to Kings Highway. Well, those are maybe some of the easier tasks. Some of the harder tasks is to figure out how to do youth programming in 2019. It is quite different than how it used to be. We also need to look at a comprehensive program of safety and security procedures. For example, if this morning there was some kind of a tornado warning, what would we do? Well, we take shelter. Well, how exactly are we going to do that? And things like that you can kind of figure out ahead of time, and so everybody's on the same page. And if we would have an emergency, then people would know what to do. Remain calm. I'm sure that we can figure all these things out over the next few months. Another responsibility I have as your interim is to look for systemic problems that keep cropping up. Maybe some long-term issues we need to address. Things that might keep us from living out our mission. Another major task is to get the whole congregation involved in long-term planning. Where do we go as a church? We have made the decision as a board to partner with the Hope Partnership, which is a disciples program, and they have a specific program called the Epiphany Project, which will help us look at our resources and the things that you love about your congregation as we get together to hammer out where do we go from here. And you'll be hearing more about that as this year goes by. Christine Pohl is a professor of Christian ethics at a Methodist seminary. She wrote a book recently called Living in Community, Cultivating Practices That Sustain Us. She writes, if we could cut through our complacency or despair, we might be shocked by what really is at stake here. The character of our shared life in congregations, communities, and families has the power to draw people to the kingdom or to push them away. How we live together is the most persuasive sermon we'll ever get to preach. Vibrant congregations happen just like relationships and families and businesses. They happen because people put work into them. Dr. Pohl highlights 4 factors that she thinks are important in sustaining healthy congregations. The first is pretty simple, expressing gratitude. That is, we pay attention to the goodness that's around us. We notice the beautiful things and the grace that's around us. We find ways to appropriately affirm others for the good things that they do. And it also means we stop feeding the cycles of complaint and turn our attention to God's faithfulness and goodness. Her second idea was that we keep promises. Betrayal breaks lives and relationships to pieces. And even small betrayals do a surprisingly amount of damage. I have a bad feeling that I've forgotten something, that I promised somebody that I would do. Maybe it was a small thing. You know, hey, I'll call, or we'll get together, or stop by, and then I never showed up. We need to keep our promises and follow the policies that we've agreed on. And sometimes our communities ask, well, what did we do here? I mean, do we have structures of accountability in place? Our third point was to live truthfully. You know, it can be risky to live in a truthful environment. When we are true about ourselves, we have to acknowledge our frailties and our temptations, and other people may choose to take advantage of us because of our transparency and vulnerability. You know, we want people to think that we're good and good at what we do. And we're afraid if people really knew the truth about us, they would be deeply disappointed or disinterested in the good news of Christ. The elders last month looked at the responsibilities that they're given. It's a short paragraph, and part of that says the elders are to advise, counsel, comfort, and admonish. And they gave themselves a real low score for admonishing. They don't think they're doing very good at admonishing, you know, because we don't want to admonish people. hesitant about speaking truthfully sometimes. We're not always sure that what we know is true, or we don't know the whole story, or we might be mistaken about the facts or interpretation. But you know, if we are to grow together in maturity in Christ, we need to have some honest conversations, living truthfully. Our fourth point is, it's important that congregations offer hospitality. Of course, we greet people that come in, especially if they're like us. But in Matthew 25, Jesus tells a story in response to his disciples' questions about recognizing signs at the end of the age. And he says, there's this final judgment where the sheep and the goats are separated on the basis of whether or not they had welcomed and fed and clothed the Son of Man. You know, I was hungry and you gave me food, a stranger and you welcomed me. Jesus said, just as you did with one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. This passage is central to almost every teaching and tradition related to hospitality, because it links the care of those in need with the care of Jesus himself. Or he talks about this kingdom, and in Luke, he talks about if you're having a party, don't invite just your friends or your brothers or relatives, you know, the people that will reciprocate, because you'll be repaid. When you give a banquet, invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. Now, when Jesus said these words, it was as countercultural as it is today. But the ancient church was convinced that Christians had to open their doors to everyone. So Dr. Cole points that we are to offer gratitude and make and keep promises and live truthfully and respond boldly to hospitality, that it will show to others. Jesus put so much at stake in his disciples. I mean, they were the ones that had to carry on the message. And he prayed that they could be one in the Father and in him and with one another. Many of us like parables, stories. We can probably think right away of some of our favorite parables, the Good Samaritan, the Prodigal Son. One of my favorites is called the Rabbi's Gift, and you've probably heard it before, but the thing about a parable is, every time you hear it, the parable may be the same, but you're different. And there's a possibility to learn something different each time. There was once a monastery that was old and had fallen on hard times. Centuries earlier, it had been a thriving place. Many dedicated monks lived and worked there. And this monastery had great influence on the realm. But now there was only 5 old monks. They were all over 70, and it was a dying order. A few miles from the monastery, in their woods, was a cabin that a rabbi would occasionally visit as a retreat. And the monks kind of had a sense of when the rabbi was there. Sometimes they would even see smoke from his stove. And one day the abbot said, I think I'm going to go visit the rabbi and see if he could give us some advice, some help for our monastery. And he goes, and the rabbi is glad to see them, and they have tea, and they study the Torah and talk about that, and the problems that the rabbi and the abbot share. And the rabbi says, oh, you know, people just aren't interested in religion anymore like they used to be, and I know it's hard. I says, and the abbot said, is there just anything that you could tell me? And the rabbi says, not really. I don't really have advice for you, but I tell you that one of you might be the Messiah. Well, the abbot goes back to the monastery. He's disappointed, and the monks are eager to hear what his conversation was with the rabbi, and the abbot says, well, I don't know. He didn't really have much to say. He said one thing really strange. He said, one of us could be the Messiah. Well, nothing more was said. And then the monks began to think about that and wondered, well, could that really be true? One of us could be the Messiah? And they thought, well, it must be the abbot, because he's been our leader for so long, and he's such a good man. Or well, maybe it could be Brother Thomas, because he's a holy man. He's a man of wisdom and light. Well, he couldn't have meant Brother Elred, because Brother Elred gets crotchety at times, but he's almost always right. Or maybe he meant Brother Philip, although Philip is so passive and shy. He's kind of a nobody, but he's always there when you need him. Loyal and trustworthy. So they begin to think about this, and as they began to mull over the rabbi's words, they began to change their attitudes about one another. And they began to treat each other with extraordinary respect, on the chance that one of them actually might be the Messiah. Now, the monastery was in a beautiful forest, and people would come from time to time, and they would picnic on the grounds and walk the trails, and sometimes they would go into the chapel and pray and all that. People began to notice there was something different about this place. They weren't really conscious of it, but they sensed that there was kind of like an aura of respect. It was different than the other places in their world. So many of them found that it was such a holy feeling to be a part of going to the grounds of the monastery. They began to come back more, and then some of them began to invite their friends, and they would come more frequently to picnic and to pray. And the friends began to invite friends. And as more and more visitors came, some of the younger men talked to the old monks, and after a while, one of them asked if he could join them. And then another. And then another. And with a few years, the monastery had began to become a thriving order. Thanks to the rabbi's gift, it became a vibrant center of light and spirituality throughout the realm. John 17 records Jesus' prayer to his Father for the church, for you and me. He asked that all of us would be one so the world might believe. It's just an interim suggestion, but when we care for one another, and when we care to affirm one another and live faithfully and treat each other with love and respect, then the world can't help but find the church to be attractive, even compelling.